"My father sent me to buy your land," she said. Those were Claire Whitmore's first words as she stepped out of her immaculate SUV, which looked like a splash of luxury against the dusty brown of my driveway. She didn't even look where she was stepping. Her stiletto heels sank instantly into the thick Montana mud, but she didn't flinch. She had that icy stare of someone used to treating people like obstacles on a profit chart. I was leaning over the engine of my 1984 International tractor, my hands greasy with oil and sweat dripping down my back. I wiped my hands on an old rag, breathed in the dry air that smelled of hay and pine, and looked at her. Claire was stunning, in a cool, untouchable way like a jewel kept in a safe. But here, under the relentless midday sun, she just seemed out of place. I replied with the one thing she didn't expect to hear. "I'll only sell it if you stay here for a month." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sounds were the crack of the hot metal of the tractor and the wind whistling through the barbed wire fences. Claire blinked, her mask of confidence wavering for a second. "1 month?" she repeated, her voice full of disbelief. "Mr. Thorne, I have a real estate empire to manage in Chicago. I don't have time for field games." "This is no game, Claire," I replied, moving closer and letting her smell the hard work that land demanded. "Your father wants this land to build an industrial complex. He wants to erase my family's history with cement. If you want my signature, you'll first have to understand what you're trying to destroy. 30 days. Live my life, wake up at my time, eat at my table. In the end, if you still want the contract, I'll sign it. My name is Lucas Thorne. For 3 years, I've struggled alone to keep this farm alive, the last thing I have left of my parents." I knew Claire was danger personified, but what I didn't yet know was that those 30 days wouldn't just test her patience. They would destroy all the barriers I had built around my heart. Before we continue, a heartfelt request. Please subscribe to the channel. I would be very grateful for your support. Claire didn't back down. For her, 30 days was just an operational cost, a deadline in a contract she was used to meeting. But Montana doesn't follow Chicago rules. On the first morning, the alarm clock rang at 4:30. The sky was still a dark velvet cloak and the cold cut like a razor. When I knocked on the guest room door, she appeared minutes later, her face pale and dark circles under her eyes that not even the most expensive makeup could hide. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "In the barn," I replied. "The cows don't wait for breakfast." The day was a choreographed disaster. Claire tried to maintain her authoritative posture, but Montana terrain is a master at humiliating arrogance. I watched Claire stumble in the mud, struggle with bales of hay that weighed half her body, and finally fall silent as I carried her to the top of Lookout Hill, where the sun was beginning to paint the horizon orange and purple. "Why, Lucas?" she asked, wiping the dirt from her forehead. "My father offered 3 times the market value. You could be on a beach anywhere in the world far away from this dust." I pointed to the lone oak tree by the stream. "My parents are buried there. My grandparents too. This land isn't a financial asset, Claire. It's a promise. When your father builds concrete warehouses, he's not creating progress, he's burying memories. He sent you here because he knows I'm priceless. He thinks you're my weakness." She looked away. For the first time, the hardness in her eyes gave way to something that seemed doubt. Claire had spent her life being her father's tool, the weapon he used against anyone who crossed his path. But here, surrounded by the vast silence of the prairie, she seemed like just a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to have the earth beneath her feet. I introduced Claire to the neighbors, the Miller family, who survived the drought thanks to our shared water supply. I showed her the marks on the kitchen wall where my mother measured my height every year. Claire listened to everything, processing it not like an investor, but like someone beginning to realize that numbers don't tell the whole story. However, the world she came from wasn't going to give up without a fight. At the end of the first week, as the wind blew strongly from the mountains, I saw Claire hiding behind the barn, frantically talking on her cell phone. Her tone was filled with fear. "Yes, Dad. I know I almost have his signature, I just need more time." I felt a pang of disappointment that I shouldn't have felt. After all, this was a business deal, wasn't it? But as I watched her in the silvery moonlight, I realized Claire was fighting a much bigger internal battle than the possession of that land She was discovering that, in Montana, what destroys you isn't hard work, but the truth that silence forces you to confront. The change didn't come with words, but with the weight of the sky. By the third week, the air in Montana had become thick, charged with the static electricity that precedes the great summer storms. The barometer dropped dramatically. I knew what was coming. Claire, used to seeing the rain through the double-glazed windows of skyscrapers, had no idea of the fury that nature can unleash when there is nothing to stop it. The storm hit the farm around 2 in the morning. The wind howled like a wounded animal, whipping against the wooden walls of the house. A metallic clang echoed outside. The latch on the main barn had given way. I struggled to open the front door against the force of the wind. When I reached the patio, the rain was so thick I could barely see an inch in front of my nose. That's when I saw her. Claire was already outside. She wasn't wearing her silk blazer or expensive shoes. She was wearing my old rubber boots and a canvas coat I'd left on the porch. She was in the middle of the mud, desperately trying to close the side gate where the animals, panicked by the thunder, threatened to flee. She was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, but she didn't scream. She fought with a determination I had never seen in anyone in the city. "Help me with the calf," she cried, her voice barely audible above the thunder. One of the newborn calves had strayed from its mother and was cornered against the barbed wire fence. Claire ran to it without hesitation. She knelt in the mud, shielding the little animal with her own body while I secured the gate. Together we carried the animal to the safety of the barn. Inside, the smell of dry straw and animal heat contrasted sharply with the chaos outside. We both leaned against the wall, panting, covered in mud and water. I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see the cold Chicago executive. I saw someone who had just discovered she was capable of fighting for something alive. That night, the electricity went out. We lit candles in the kitchen, and the silence that followed the storm was the most honest we've ever shared. "My father never taught me how to save anything," she said softly, looking at her scratched hands. "He only taught me how to win. He says the world is a chessboard and people are pieces. But today, when that calf looked at me, I felt real, Lucas. For the first time in my life. I moved closer, and the space between us felt charged with a tension that had nothing to do with business. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the rhythm of her breathing still quickened by the storm. Claire didn't look away. At that moment, the purchase and sale agreement on the table seemed like a worthless piece of trash. I saw her eyes drift to my lips for a split second, and the world stopped. The month I had imposed on her was turning into something neither of us could control. The 30th day arrived with a heavy silence. The air was still, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Claire was on the balcony, already dressed in her gray Chicago suit, the armor she wore to face the world. On the worn wooden table lay the sales contract and a gold pen. "Time's up, Lucas," she said, unable to look me in the eye. I felt a lump in my throat that no words could undo. I had kept my promise. I was ready to sign and let her go, ready to watch the bulldozers destroy everything I loved, just so I wouldn't have to see her leave with that weight in her eyes. But the sound of heavy engines interrupted the moment. 2 black cars and a demolition truck bearing the Whitmore Enterprises logo entered through the gate, raising a choking cloud of dust. A middle-aged man with a face sculpted from granite and eyes as cold as a Montana winter stepped out of the first car. It was Arthur Whitmore, Claire's father. "Enough of this charade," he roared, walking toward us with an arrogance that made the ground tremble. "Claire, give me that paper. If this peasant didn't sign willingly, my lawyers will take care of removing him from here by force." Claire took a step back, shocked. "Dad, we had an agreement." Lucas fulfilled his part. "I lived here. I understand now why he doesn't want to sell." Arthur let out a dry, cruel laugh. "Do you understand? You understand nothing. I sent you here because I knew he would pity a beautiful woman. It was a strategy, Claire. You were just the bait. Do you really think I care what you think or feel about this place? Sign this now and let's go. You have a company to run, if you're even competent enough to do so anymore." I saw the exact moment Claire's heart broke, and I also saw the moment she rebuilt herself. She looked at her hands, still scarred from the night of the storm, and then she looked at me. "No," she said. Her voice was low, but it carried the force of thunder. "What did you say?" Arthur approached, his face red with anger. "I said no," she repeated, picking up the sales contract. This land isn't a financial asset, Dad. It's a promise. And you don't have the right to erase anyone's history to feed your ego. In front of all of us, with a calmness that sent shivers down my spine, Claire tore the multi-million-dollar contract into minute pieces and let the Montana wind carry them away. "You're fired," Arthur shouted beside himself. "You're going to lose everything. Your job, your apartment, your name. You can have all of this," she replied, walking over to me and taking my calloused hand in front of her father. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not a piece on your chessboard. I am Claire Whitmore, and I am home." Arthur drove off, leaving behind only the smoke from his tires and a silence heavy with victory. Claire trembled, but not with fear. We looked at each other, and without saying a word, we knew that the contract we had torn up was what bound us to the past, and what we were beginning there was something that no money in the world could buy. Life in Montana didn't become easier after that day, but it did, for the first time, become complete. Arthur Whitmore kept his promise and cut all financial ties with his daughter, but what he didn't understand is that you can't take anything away from someone who has already discovered that they don't need luxury to be happy. Claire didn't leave. She traded silk suits for flannel shirts and board meetings for the productive silence of our kitchen. But make no mistake, the brilliant executive hasn't disappeared. She used her sharp mind to help restructure the farm, creating a cooperative that today protects not only our land, but that of all the neighbors her father tried to crush. Today, a year later, we sit on the porch at the end of each day. The calf we saved in that storm is now a strong bull, grazing in the field ahead of us. I look to the horizon, and no longer see only the past or my parents' graves. I see a future. We learn that time is not something you spend, but something you cultivate. We learn that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to protect what is real, even when the whole world tells us to accept the price. Claire often says her father sent her here to buy land, but she ended up finding something no contract could describe. She found her own voice amidst the Montana wind. And me? I discovered that my inheritance wasn't just these acres of land, but the ability to open the gate for someone who was as lost as I was. Sometimes life needs to put us in a dead end to force us to change direction. And if we're lucky, in that change of course, we find someone willing to walk beside us without haste, simply for the pleasure of seeing the sun rise once more. If this story moved you, subscribe now to help me promote the channel and so you don't miss our next stories. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. And remember, your strength doesn't come from what you possess, but from the courage to start over whenever your heart asks for a new horizon.